Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where we talk about how authors write their books, how they publish them, and how they market them. You can find us on YouTube. Just look for The Writer's Dream, or you could look for my name, Linda Maria Frank. We're also on Facebook. We have a Facebook page where we often feature one of the guests from The Writer's Dream. And if you have a question for The Writer's Dream, please ask that question through the Facebook messaging service, and I will try to answer your question. And also, if you're interested on being the show, go that route, and I'll get in touch with you, and we'll make a date for you to be on the show. Today's guest is Jennifer Farber. And she is a writer and a sometime journalist, and she's going to tell us about that. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Linda. I'm really glad to be on your show and to talk about what we do. So.
Yes. Tell us about you first.
Okay. My name is Jennifer Farber, and my last name is spelled F-A-R-B-A-R. So one thing I've lived with all my life is having everybody misspell my name.
F-E-R-B-E-R,
right.
Relative of Edna.
And exactly.
Yeah.
But, you know, as a writer, of course, it's really important, our bylines and our... So I grew up in New York City and began my education at the Calhoun School, which was kind of a Montessori-like, very open classroom. And we were allowed to choose what subjects we studied throughout the day. And I loved reading. I loved language arts. I remember putting my name, my little hook, on language arts for, I think, 4 or 5 periods of the day, every day. And I am told that I taught myself to read and surprised my mother by coming into my parents' bedroom one morning holding The Red Pony, and I just began reading to her. I think I was about 2 and a half.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's early.
Yeah.
That's really early.
Yeah.
3 is early to read.
I just loved it, and I remember it was like, I really remember it. It felt like cracking a code.
Sure, that's what it is.
Yeah, okay. Right.
Because reading teachers refer to students' ability to decode. The first thing you have to do is to decode the letters.
Right.
And a lot of kids decode but never understand. The next level, of course, is comprehension.
Okay. Well, it was really wonderful. I loved it. And then in 5th grade, well, at the end of 4th grade, this was in the 1970s. So there was, you know, some development, some shifts in education that really were coming to bear. And my mother had gotten her an MS to teach in early child development.
So it's probably an MA.
An MA, okay. And she taught herself. So in New York City, there are certain schools that are thought to be better for certain kids, and there's that atmosphere. So I took the ERBs, which are the tests for a private school, and I scored in the 99th percentile in reading comprehension. And I loved taking the test. And then, Linda, I went, based on that score, I was accepted and went to the Brearley School, which has a reputation for being a very competitive, very good school. It was founded by a man named Samuel Brearley to provide girls with an education that only boys were getting then. And I went from there, I went to Stuyvesant High School, and from there to Connecticut College. I majored in English and French, and I took a writing class and then a journalism class. And I loved it. I really remember thinking, this is really easy. You know, I could read a magazine and see how it, I guess that's what that means. I got a job 2 weeks out of college at Esquire magazine. They were looking for an editorial assistant.
That's pretty prestigious.
Yeah, yeah.
And you have a byline.
I do have a byline. I think I'd been there, let's see, this is 1986. I started working there in 1985. So this is a year after I began. The article is called Mailer on Mailer. Let's take a look. And I did get a byline. Now, since we're talking about the publishing business as well, my byline is very, very little. You could see it. It's right down here on the bottom.
But that's,
So-
you know, in the New York Times, that's where the bylines are often. They're
That is true.
tucked away in the bottom.
They're tucked away. It was really exciting. It was really exciting. And I just, that first publication, really, I had been published in the literary magazine at Connecticut College, Fiction. And I just loved kind of the openness of journalism. I know some fiction writers feel that fiction is more open. You're creating it and you don't ever know what's going to happen. But I like sort of the blend of actual human conversation or interaction and then the writing process.
I think the difference is when you're writing fiction, you're creating the reality. But when you're in journalism, you're reacting in the reality.
Right.
The
Right.
reality is not created. At least it shouldn't be in journalism.
It shouldn't be. It feels that way sometimes. I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this.
No.
But you feel like you're creating a reality because you're taking these thoughts and elements and actions and people's descriptions and your own thoughts and presenting them that way. And it feels very much like you're shaping and describing one little piece of history, you know, which is nice.
Hopefully it's a reflection of the truth.
Yes, yeah, I know. Fake news and
Please.
yeah, it's something heartbreaking that's happened to see the New York Times.
But you know, I think there's going to be, that the media is going to make a reaction, or going to have a very strong reaction against the statements that are being made by various people about how they don't really represent the truth. I think there are enough journalists who are interested in the truth that there'll be a backlash to this.
I hope so.
We can
I
only
hope so,
guess.
yeah. I hope that's true. And I think that in general, you know, that is the best possible outcome. When things die down, you know, people do their best and they do what they do well. And certainly the Times has reporters who do that.
But something else was going on in your life.
Something else was going on in my life. I am the middle of 3 daughters, and I was born to a father who had a lot of issues. And I think we were talking a little bit before the show, that sort of nature versus nurture question. And I will backtrack just a minute to say I began writing a memoir about him.
Yes.
About 14 years ago. And I really came right up against that question. But in short, because I know you have a lot of questions you'd like to cover, I did grow up with a father who was very changeable and who had a sort of bearing that indicated he was sort of a world unto himself. And
I think that's called narcissism.
yes, I think I learned that's I think what that is now.
Well, I think, you know, you said you started these memoirs 14 years ago, and you are still writing them. This is the book that's in progress. But when you decide to tackle a subject like this, there's a lot of, I'm sure you're going to say this many times during our questions and answers, is that there's a lot that you have to learn
Yes.
to put that story down in a way that's accurate.
Yeah, yeah. And it is, that's very well put, actually. When I began research for the memoir, well, I had begun to think about the idea of writing about my father. He committed suicide when I was 27 years old. And, you know, as difficult or, you know, troubled I came to know our relationship as being, there were times with him that were a lot of fun. And, you know, he was very handsome. He could make people laugh. He was very fit. He played volleyball on the beach and he lifted weights. And he was a good-looking guy and he could be enormously fun to be with. He liked to do things, and then the other side of that was this really dark, brooding man who would sit at the head of the table at dinner time and, you know, have a few martinis before dinner, have a little wine with dinner, and it was just, his eyes would go inward, if such a thing is possible. Mm-hmm. He was looking back down sort of hallways of shadows into something that I think had happened a long time ago. I know that his sister, his only sibling, his older sister, Dorothea, committed suicide as well. And that was a year before I was born. So she was 30. And, you know, I wrote an article that was published in the New York Times Magazine in the Hers column. It's called Hush of Suicide. And this is just a copy of it. There's a nice illustration. And what I wrote really, Linda, was basically about my experience of, you know, it opened up a whole new world for me. And part of that was I did go to a few meetings of a suicide survivor group that met at Lenox Hill Hospital. And everybody present was a relative, a father, a mother, sister, brother, of someone who had taken their own lives. And, you know, I heard people talking about a description of the actual event, you know, what happened, what it looked like when they were found, you know.
Yeah.
I remember one young woman had put her head in the oven. But, you know, I felt like, well, there was one couple who described their son's suicide note, and they said that it ended with a smiley face and just saying to his parents, "I'm happy, please, you know, go on and enjoy your lives." And I thought, well, they're not doing that. They're here and they're really sad and they're really obviously bereft. And, you know, I felt at that time, maybe I identified with him because he was a young man, but that, you know, you have to believe him. That's what he said at the moment of his death. I mean, last words, and they're important. And it just got me thinking about how differently we talk about suicide than we do about other kinds of death. You know, people, I think, would say it was offensive and maybe radical to describe how somebody killed themselves. If there were provisions asked for or made as for the disposition of them after death. And I think that what that seems to say is well, you know, suicide, the word from Latin means suicide, self-murder, like homicide is killing another man. So, you know, I think there's that taboo, and the Hers column, The Hush of Suicide, really, I think what came out in my own writing expressed to me, and I hope to some of the readers, that we do ourselves a disservice as a society by pushing this under the rug, and we really deprive some people of space in which to grieve. And I think unexpressed grief, I've learned, can cause a tremendous amount of psychological damage for people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's suicide is a loaded topic today, and of course, it's only in the last, I would say, maybe 20 to 30 years that people really do come out and talk about these kinds of problems. In the old days, as I like to refer to them as, like my childhood, people shoved everything under the rug. You know, you were not allowed to air your dirty linen in public, was the way they put it. And suicide was certainly one of those things. First of all, there are religious constraints against it. Society has its, you know, we always have to overcome these mores. But one of the questions that I thought I would ask you is you described your father as he had this ability to create a world in which he was the hero and everybody else in the world was against him. They were the ones who were causing him to be a failure at various things. Do you think that was a function of mental illness, or was that because of the way he was brought up? Was it culture? And also his suicide. His sister committed suicide. This is interesting. And I wanted to ask you also, when I thought of the term mental illness, but then we talked before, and you talked about the fact that you really feel that he was an alcoholic. So what do you think really was at play there? What created this personality that caused you so much pain?
Well, that certainly is something that I am doing my best to find out. And I did, I had a proposal for my memoir, and I was trying to get a literary agent, and I submitted it to a couple of literary agencies. And one responded that, that they didn't really feel that there was a book there yet. Something more, was needed. I think what I was writing was the memoir part, and it was very personal, and that because of, it was my first time, and I was doing it by myself, and so we learned. Now the question is, as a writer, I know you've sent me some emails about how to publish, how to market. Those are all really helpful, and I was really trying to do this on my own. And there was a change that had taken place in publishing. This was after I left print magazines. I went to work as an editor for a .com, and a whole lot more was being done online. And so that kind of was good and bad and different. There was a lot more writing. Some of it very good, some of it not so good, some of it serving a different function maybe than, writing. We typically think of writing. And so I was caught there a little bit, and I think that, part of writing, what we talk about is we talk about finding your voice.
Yes.
And, that is really something that I don't want to say I was overconfident in, but I will say that I felt that I was speaking a truth, writing a truth, and that sort of on a human level, that's part of our jobs as human beings, is to tell the truth, to show the truth to people. That's how we record our history, our civilization, our wars, our empires, our births and deaths.
Well, if you don't face the truth, it's impossible to build anything after that.
That's correct. That's correct.
Because it's like a house of cards.
That's right.
No foundation.
No, none. In fact, that's an expression I used in my proposal, that I really felt as though my father had erected a house of cards to substitute for the life he chose not to live. And I think that it's a multiplicity of factors, but one thing is that, when you are perhaps, well, to address your question, I think some aspect of maybe what became narcissism was kind of the doting and the attention paid to him as the only son. Jewish family, middle class, he grew up in Flatbush, had a lot of aunts and uncles. I think his nickname was Buster because his mother had carried him very large. She was diabetic, so he was a large baby. And I think that his older sister helped him along a great deal and kind of helped him transition. I think she had an idea that the world was bigger than Brooklyn and wanted to encourage him and somehow help him to, get out of that. I don't know if that is a desire that he shared with her. In other words, I don't really know if, culturally speaking, that was very common in that era and that time for Jewish people. And that's something that I guess I need to maybe look into a little bit.
Right.
and describe.
I'd like to read a quote from something that you wrote about him that I think probably is helpful in describing what you were dealing with and possibly why he committed suicide. And I'd like to read it. I think it's well written and good description. He ran roughshod over my childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. I wish he had gone to prison for that. He was given everything and indulged the worst small-minded fear there is, an inability to be curious, to fail, to succeed, to be wounded and pick himself up. In short, all the experiences that make up a life he chose to ignore in favor of a world where he was the only person who mattered, earning that privilege by stealing from, beating up, or lying to the men around him, the women he slept with. That's... So I think, and a partial answer to my question is that some of this is from his background, but usually, there are a lot of us who were spoiled when we were kids. But when you get out into the real world, sometimes the real world beats you up, and you learn that you can't behave that way. So some of this, to me, indicates that there was some other thing going on, and the things that you've said.
Yeah.
So you describe brooding, which is like depression. So do you want to go there at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you just said is true, and I think that I am so grateful for every little sort of chip in the iceberg that I make in terms of really, uncracking this mystery and finding out who he was. I have a friend who is helping me go through some of my material, some of my records and so forth in preparation for doing your show. And, I just thought, it was like the greatest kindness that somebody could do for me at this time. It was daunting to me, the material I had, and the material I had seemed weighty, and I think I was feeling not up to the task of anchoring, providing the surrounding foundation for that weighty material. Those are big questions. But I do think that, and what my friend said was that, I think your father had a personality disorder.
Well, first of all, what you describe is partially depression. Some of what you describe is a narcissistic personality. You've also shared with me that he, before dinner, had 2 or 3 martinis and possibly was an alcoholic. These are huge problems to deal with, and you have described the symptoms that you suffered as something very akin to PTSD.
Yes, I do. I think that, it's a lot to discover, and it's a lot to discover. And I think now we've gotten sort of a little bit more comfortable or used to a kind of, I want to say, sanitized or happy version of learning things about our parents or our ancestors. We have Ancestry.com, and that's neat. Now I can dress like, my dominant culture and, find something of myself. It's really something to go, say, for example, to 12-step meetings and see that learn there a completely surprising thing, which is that my father was an alcoholic. And I think the other things that I've learned, it's very uncomfortable. I feel as though I've opened Pandora's box to a certain extent. And I really, I struggled for a while with that. And I thought maybe I should write about something else. But I think that writing, comes so deeply from your mind, your intellect, and part of my PTSD is an inability to sort of put that past or that experience behind me in a way that it doesn't interfere with my daily living.
Right. Sometimes it helps to look at your life like it's a movie, and there are other people. And then you pretty much figure it out when you're watching who you think are other people playing the roles of, your parents and yourself. And sometimes you see it more clearly if it's somebody else. But have you given any thought to the piece that you need to put in the memoir that's going to make that agent pick it up?
A big part of what happened, so there's sort of my father in my life, right? Who he was as a father, what his demeanor was like, what it was like to grow up with him. Mm-hmm. But then my father is also a sort of quasi-public figure. He published a story in Esquire magazine after he was arrested for hashish smuggling. And part of what his arrest did was it really pushed him towards suicide. But this is my father. And I think...
There you go.
Good, okay.
Better.
There's a lot more to be said and written, and I think the short answer is, Linda, I need to research a little bit more, mm-hmm. and I think that I'll know when I get there, and there's a certain amount of just giving yourself over to the process.
This is an important journey that you're going on.
Yes.
And I think that you've done an amazing amount of work so far, and I think when you get your story all together, I think it's going to be very helpful because you share a lot with many, many other people as far as parents and alcoholism and depression. These are all subjects that people are now talking about, and hopefully to the benefit of everyone. So we'll have to have you on again somewhere further along in the journey, and we have many topics that we didn't even touch on, important ones.
Sounds good.
So any advice to the budding writer?
I just think of the writing that I read that was like sort of a lightning bolt through me. And I thought, they're describing me or something I saw or something. And it's just wonderful to be transported that way. Believe in yourself.
There you go. Very nice. Nice to have you, Jennifer.
Nice to be here. Thank you very much.
I look forward to the next one.